Welcome back. Let's go to the UK now and catch up with Spiked Online's chief political writer, Brendan O'Neill. Brendan, good to catch up with you as always. Thanks for joining me. Let's start with Keir Starmer's threat to recognise a Palestinian state. You've written that the UK Prime Minister is essentially telling Israel that unless it lays down its arms, Britain will reward its enemies. This will go down in history as one of the most scandalous betrayals of a friend of modern times. Brendan, I mean, this would be news to Hamas's ears, won't it?
It's unbelievable what Starmer has done. I think this is one of the dumbest and most dangerous things a British Prime Minister has done in many, many years, because he's essentially blackmailing Israel. He's saying to them, if you don't lay down your arms, if you don't agree to a ceasefire by September, we will recognise the state of Palestine. So he's blackmailing a supposed ally, which is a really repulsive thing to do. But even worse than that, he's incentivising Hamas to carry on with its barbarism, to carry on with its war, because Hamas now knows that if the war carries on until September, the United Kingdom will recognise Palestine. So Hamas now has a very clear motivation to carry on with its barbaric acts, to carry on attacking IDF soldiers, to carry on using its force to try and starve Palestinians in order that the world will hate Israel even more. He's given a green light to this army of anti-Semites to carry on doing what it's doing. That is an unforgivable thing for any prime minister to do against an ally like Israel.
Yeah, absolutely. And in the end, we know Hamas only wants one state, its own state, and to wipe out Israel. And that is the problem. Now, Brendan, I mentioned earlier the New York Times has been forced to admit that the image of a child in Gaza that they splashed on their front page, claiming that he was being starved to death, was incorrect. They've now admitted that the boy actually has a pre-existing medical condition. Brendan, there was no apology, nothing. But regardless, it's too late. That image has now gone around the world.
You know, was it Mark Twain who said that a lie goes around the world while the truth is still putting its boots on? And that's exactly what's happened here. This lie has spread around the world, this blood libel, which says that Israel is intentionally starving people in Gaza and intentionally starving children. Look, no one doubts that there is great suffering in Gaza. How could there not be? Hamas brought a war to this tiny enclave, knowing full well that the civilians there would suffer enormously. There is great suffering there. There is hunger and there is misery. But this idea that Israel is intentionally starving people or intentionally killing children is just a grotesque lie. And I think what the New York Times did is unforgivable, because it really fed into that idea that the Jewish nation, peculiar among the nations of the world, loves to kill children, loves to hurt children, loves to torture children. It spread that libel around the world. And that's a really unforgivable thing to do against Israel or against any nation.
No, absolutely. I mean, that image was splashed across papers here in Australia too. Our very own Prime Minister Anthony Albanese even referenced that image, and it was all false. It was all a false picture, as it was from the very beginning, and it's too misleading. It's just too late now. Now, I want to ask you about these Arab countries, including Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt. They've all signed onto a statement calling for Hamas to disarm and end the rule of Gaza in a bid to end that war. I was quite surprised by this. What do you make of this from the Arab countries?
Isn't it just amazing that these Arab countries, some of which are pretty extremist countries, especially Saudi Arabia, you know, not the most pleasant country in the world, let's say, but they now have a more progressive, honest, forward-looking take on this war than many Westerners do. If you say to a Western leftist, I think Hamas should lay down its arms and I think Hamas should surrender and release the hostages, they look at you as if you're insane. They say, no, the problem is entirely Israel. Stop talking about Hamas. Now we have these Arab leaders coming out and saying what everyone else should be saying, which is that this war will end when the army that started it, i.e. Hamas, lays down its arms, returns the hostages, and completely surrenders to Israel. That's what will end this war. You know, these Arab leaders know something that Western leftists are clueless about, which is that radical Islamist anti-Semitic movements like Hamas are a real problem. There's a reason that Arab countries are pretty strict on Islamist movements, because they know they're quite threatening. So the fact that these countries are now more sensible on this issue than many Western leftists and many Western media outlets is shocking, and people should really take that to heart.
Well, that was going to be my next question to you, Brendan. I mean, you know, how is it that Arab countries have more moral clarity on this issue than the UK or even France, for example?
Isn't that just extraordinary that the UK and France are both scrabbling to recognize Palestine, even though everyone knows that that will essentially reward Hamas? That will essentially say to Hamas, for killing Jews less than 2 years ago, for invading Israel and murdering 1,200 people, we will reward you with a state. That is essentially what Britain and France are saying. It's utterly disgusting. And yet you have these Arab nations who seem to be a bit more clued up about what a problem Hamas is, and also about the fact that this war has gone on for too long and it's right on their doorstep. They don't like it anymore. They may not be the biggest fans of Israel, but they want this to stop. And I think we should actually pay attention to those nations, which is not something I would normally say about nations like that, but they're right on this question. This war will end when Hamas stops its fighting and agrees to stop existing. That's how this war and all the suffering comes to an end.
Yeah, we're almost out of time, Brendan, but I just want to ask you, do you think now that the UK has made this move with Keir Starmer's announcement today, do you think it will spur on allies like Australia to follow suit?
It might well do, and that worries me enormously. I think something we have to look out for is the West's abandonment of Israel, because I do think that's coming. Thankfully, America is still standing by Israel, but other nations are turning their back on it. And in its darkest hour, when it needs our support more than ever, I think that's an unforgivable thing to do. And what Starmer has done is a form of appeasement. This is his Neville Chamberlain moment, where he's bowing down to a fascist army and betraying a friend.
No, you're spot on as always. Brendan O'Neill, always enjoy catching up with you. Thank you very much for joining me on the show this evening.